QWalk Naturally Together Forum. This is forum number 6, and today we have the pleasure of talking to Jen Corsbie about fire ant eradication in southeast Queensland. So Jen, welcome to that.
Thank you. And also thank you for the opportunity to share with you information on the fire ant program and how we as a whole community can help protect Australia together.
Awesome. Well, looking forward to finding out more about it, Jen. So let's just launch straight into your presentation, and I'll turn my camera off, but I'll be sitting in the background here if you have any issues and watching the chat. So I'll let you go for it. Off you go.
Thank you, Greg. Well, first of all, how do we look for fire ants? So fire ants, they don't belong in Australia. They are an introduced species. Where they come from is South America, in the world's largest wetland area. So being introduced to Australia, they have come to a very natural, welcoming environment. So with over 3,000 native ant species in Australia, it would be quite easy to assume that there would be no difference, but fire ants have actually given us a few really good ways of identifying them and separating them from our native ants. So firstly, and it's a really big identifier, fire ants come in a variety of sizes. So in any given nest, they will range between 2 to 6 mil. Our native ants, with the exception of a couple of species that have 2 different sizes, our native ants are normally uniform in size. And that's nothing to do with age or maturity, that's just how they come out. So the other identifier is that they are copper brown with a darker abdomen. And they're quite coppery colour when they're out in the sun, which is where they like to be. But the reason why they have a darker abdomen is because the abdomen is a venom sac. It's filled with an alkaloid venom, and it's that alkaloid venom that causes anaphylaxis. Now, that venom sac, it does have a stinger attached. So the other identifier is that they are aggressive. They swarm and attack when disturbed. Our native ants will normally flee in every direction, but fire ants, because they normally have one fire ant queen in their nest, they are genetically programmed to protect that queen at all costs. So when they swarm and attack, they will do as a collective. So on their mandibles, they have pincers which they will bite to cling on to whatever they think is attacking them. While they're biting, they will arch their back over and put their stinger into you as well, or whatever is they think is attacking them. And they will drain that venom sac into their host. And of course, hundreds, possibly thousands of ants all attacking at once. That's where fire ants become potentially fatal by causing anaphylaxis. The other way to identify fire ants is that they are subterranean. So fire ants, they live underground and they forage underground for their food and water. So they have no reason to come up and out of the surface mound. So you won't see any exit or entry holes in a fire ant nest. It will look just like loose dirt on the ground. So now that we know what we're looking for, we need to know where to look for them. As I said, they are highly invasive, They are highly invasive. They prefer to nest in warm, open, sunny areas, preferably with a good water source nearby. They're attracted to disturbed habitats such as cleared land. So you'll notice there's a lot of home development sites going on, any quarry sites, waste facilities, newly planted gardens, anywhere where an organic material has been disturbed is a perfect place for them to nest. Any organic material whatsoever is perfect for them to make a nest. So when we say be on the lookout for fire ants, we will normally say look for a fire ant mound, but it's not always a given that they will mound. Fire ants, they can't regulate their own body temperature. What they need to do is regulate the temperature around them, so they have to manipulate their environment. And one way of doing that is through their fire ant mounds. So in the cooler months, you'll find a mound, and that's to get more heat into the nest. In the hotter months, they'll be flush against the ground, and that's to keep the temperature out of the nest. So, for example, between the end of June and the beginning of September, we will rarely perform broad-scale eradication treatment because they're not actively foraging. Fire ants don't hibernate, but they do go into a period of inactivity when it does get too cool for them. So fire ants, obviously, if that was all that they did is bed down and, create nests where they were, it would be 50% of our job being able to find them. Unfortunately, fire ants do spread, and they spread in three ways. They spread by natural flight, on floodwaters, and through human-assisted movements. Now, I'll just go through the fire ant cycle with you, and it just demonstrates very well how quickly that spread can happen. So fire ants mate while in flight. When a colony becomes to the point of maturity, and it can be anything between 6 to 12 months, and it will depend on the climate, availability of food and water. So anything as little as 6 months, a fire ant colony can become mature. When that happens, up until then, I should say, the fire ant queen, she will only produce female workers. Now, when it's mature, she will then start to produce male and female, what we call elates, which are just reproductive ants, and that means that they have wings. So once she's produced enough of them, it's usually over a 2-week period, the whole reproductive ants will fly up, they will swarm, and they'll have a mating ritual in flight. Now, unfortunately, the male reproductives that produces, that's their only purpose. So once they're mated, they drop to the ground dead. The female, she will actually go off to live a longer productive life. So once mated, she will fly up to 5 kilometers to find somewhere suitable to lay down to establish a new nest. When she does that, she will bed down and she will start to lay her first eggs within 24 hours. Now, it will take approximately 8 to 10 days for that first batch of eggs to become mature enough to go out and forage for her. While she's waiting for those eggs to be able to go out and forage, she'll eat her own wings as her food source. And that just demonstrates that that's it. Once she's bedded, that's it. She doesn't fly again. Now, the queen, she will live up to 7 years. And she will she will actually lay between 1,000 and 5,000 eggs per day. And the reason why she has to do that is because the workers that she produces, they only last 2 to 6 months. So she's continually got to reproduce and lay more eggs to replenish her workforce. The second way of fire ant spreading is through flood events. Now, fire ants can survive floods, but it has to be a slow-moving flood to actually be able to move their nest. So if they do experience slow-moving floodwaters, what they will do is all collect together to form a raft. They'll pop the fire ant queen in the middle, and they will bob about on those floodwaters for about 5 to 6 days. And once those floodwaters start to recede, they'll find somewhere to re-establish that nest, and they'll just continue on. It's really interesting to note that fire ants can survive fast-moving floods as well, and this is also how they survive bushfires. Fire ants normally build their nest down to a meter depth. In extreme weather conditions, such as fast-moving floods or bushfires, they can actually forage down to a depth of 3 meters. And like I said earlier, they don't hibernate, but they can go into a period of inactivity until they sense that extreme weather event has passed. And then they will just slowly come to the top again. The third way, and most important, more often than not, this is how we find fire ants have spread, through materials that can carry fire ants. So any organic material, if we're not very careful, they can be spread through transport. Soil, hay, quarried products, manure, mulch, turf, potted plants even. If they're transported out of the biosecurity zones, they can be unwittingly transported to a fire ant free area. So that's why we have to be really careful. That's why we have the fire ant biosecurity zones, and that's why we have the fire ants contained so that we can eradicate them. So, just to give you a really good example, the image that you can see on the screen there, you can see in the middle of that blue area a very small green and grey dot. Those are the two zones of our fire ant biosecurity zones, and that's where we have fire ants contained at the moment. If we didn't have the fire ant biosecurity zones, the fire ants would have spread since we first identified them in 2001. So over a period of 22, 23 years, they would have spread further than Mackay, further than Goulburn in the south, and they'd be travelling out towards the South Australian border. Without an eradication program, fire ant spread in Australia would be approximately 3 to 5 cases per year. And it's really interesting to note that fire ants are in a lot of other countries. No other country has an eradication program like Australia. So in other countries, such as the US, the fire ant spread rate is between 48 and 50 kilometers per year. China's spread rate is estimated to be approximately 80 cases per year. So you can see it really is quite significant. They found fire ants in the Caribbean, Taiwan, Germany, and as early as this year, they found them in Italy as well. So I'm just going to show you the biosecurity zones in close-up. So there you have our two zones in yellow and brown, sorry. So zone 1 is the yellow area. That's where we've performed 99.7% of eradication treatment. So we have very low numbers of fire ants there. Zone 2 is our pre-eradication area, as per our response plan prior to this year. The idea was that we eradicate fire ants from west to east, pushing them out towards the ocean. Unfortunately, we have had some human-assisted movements where there have been leakages top and bottom. If you can see the orange areas and the green areas in zone 1, there are new biosecurity zones as of the 1st of December today. So as of today, we've included those areas in the fire ant biosecurity zones, not because they are riddled with fire ants, but because we have had some fire ant detections in those areas, and it's through human-assisted movement. So we need to include people in those areas where there's a lot of civil construction, a lot of home and industry development sites. We need to educate them, and we need to let them know what their responsibilities are for moving those materials around, such as soil and hay. As I said, we were actually going west to east in our strategy of eradication. This year it has been changed. Because of those new fire ant finds outside of the zones, we've had a lot more funding, I should say. The Fire Ant program, it's a nationally cost-shared program by all the states and territories. And a lot of the states and territories, they have recognised the importance of eradication, and they have actually provided significantly more funding. So we're able to change our strategy and actually do a lot more treatment and a lot more surveillance. So you can see that map there on your screen. The blue band is where we're doing surveillance, and the red band is where we're performing eradication treatment. Now for the eradication treatment, we've actually come just outside the fire ant biosecurity zones, and that is to strengthen that containment. It's also to place a greater emphasis on compliance in the biosecurity zone regulations for moving organic materials. Now that is the strategy. We're going to be doing 6 rounds of treatment in those red areas over a period of 2 years. Following on from that, over the next 10 years, this is how we intend to eradicate fire ants, by shrinking the area in the middle. So eventually, in 10 years, all we'll be left with is an area where we're going to be conducting surveillance. Now, obviously, eradication treatment, it is important for people to have the information on how we treat, what we use to treat, and the methods that we treat with. So we use a range of tools. We use the aerial spraying. We use the hoppers on the back of a UTV for large areas, and we also use ground treatment through hand spreaders. So through aerial treatment, we can disperse the granular bait to large agricultural areas. We have 5 helicopters. We have 20 UTVs for large farms, open spaces such as sports fields and school ovals. And we have 450 field operatives who do the hand treatments. The reason why we use all 3 of those is because with an aerial treatment, we can only go for within 50 meters of an inhabited dwelling. So for closer to a homestead or home or residential, we have to use our ground treatment or our UTVs. I would like to actually spend a few minutes going through the baits that we use with you, because this is, it's obviously an area of concern for everybody involved, not just people who are concerned with the environment or people who work in conservation. It really is important that people know what we're actually putting on their premises, their properties, on our wetland areas, our areas of natural beauty, our national parks. So for the main part, we use a product called Distance. Now, Distance, it contains the active ingredient pyriproxyfen. Now, pyriproxyfen is found in flea collars, cockroach baits, your household pest controls, but it's at a much lower dose. Now, how the granular bait works, I'm going off the slide a little bit, but it's really important to know how the bait actually works, the granular bait works. What it is, it's actually corn grit, and we use corn grit because it's a natural forage for fire ants. We use it at a very light dispersal. It's 2 kilos of the granular bait to a hectare. So it really, really is a light dusting. And we use that because it's a natural forage for the fire ants. If we use too much product on a certain area, the fire ants won't recognize it as a food source because it's not a natural forage. So that corn grit is actually soaked in soybean oil. And what that does is it makes it irresistible to a fire ant. Fire ants are actually protein-based, whereas our native ants are sugar-based. And it's that's infused with 0.5% pyriproxyfen. So it is at a very, very low dose. The other 2 ingredients that we use are methropine and indoxacarb. Now, methropine or S-methropine is in a product that's branded Engage, and the indoxacarb is in a product branded Advian. Now, pyriproxyfen, we can't use near waterways, dams, catchment areas, reservoirs. So we use the methropine because it's safe for aquatic life. Indoxacarb, it's also toxic to aquatic life, but it's a faster acting bait that we use on cropping land. So if you can imagine, we can't bait when crops are growing. We can only use it on cropping land when a crop has been harvested. So it's a shorter space of time that we can get in and do that eradication treatment. So we blend the Advian with the Distance. So we blend the indoxacarb with the insect growth regulator, the pyriproxyfen, to actually give it a quicker kill. So just going back to the pyriproxyfen, why we use that mainly is because it's not harmful to anything. It doesn't kill anything. What it does, that pyriproxyfen, it sterilizes that fire ant queen. So if we go back to the life cycle, the workers that she produces, they only last 2 to 6 months. So that pyriproxyfen, it sterilizes the queen. She can't produce any more viable workers. So the actual ant nest, it will experience a natural death. So on organic farms, and this is really important because they have certification, we have to be very careful. And it's also organic poultry farms as well. So we use Engaged because that is, sorry, I should also say that all our baits are under permit from the Australian Pesticides and Veterinary Medicines Association. So, and the APVMA, sorry, it's actually guided by the World Health Organization as well. So, as I said earlier, it's not about eradicating fire ants, it's about the safe eradication of fire ants. So, in terms of organic farms and organic poultry farms, we use Engage because that's also certified by the Australian Organic Industry Standards and Certification Council. It allows us to, what it actually does for poultry farmers, it allows poultry farmers to pen their chickens for 24 hours. And that's not because the bait is unsafe for chickens, it's because the chickens will actually get to the bait before the fire ants. We also don't want the chickens all out at the same time as fire ants are out foraging. It's also valuable information that the fire ant bait itself, it doesn't last forever. It's designed to break down within 6 to 8 hours. So what happens is the fire ants have at maximum 6 to 8 hours to be able to forage for the fire ant bait before it neutralizes in the soil. So when we talk about baits in an environmental situation, it's really interesting to note when we actually go out and do our engagements and public events out in the community, we get a lot of questions, you know, how safe is it for the environment? But we also get comments, should I say, and recently, particularly in the last month with the extreme weather events, I had one lady who said she'd been treated, she'd had eradication treatment, and she hadn't seen any native ants since. I also had a lady in the scenic rim area who said that since eradication treatment, they hadn't seen any bandicoots. And it's not the actual bait. What it's actually coincided with is extreme weather events, particularly the bushfires. So as I said, fire ants, they can survive bushfires. Our native species, not so much. And that's what happens when you see any mammals or insects that aren't there after treatment. It might actually coincide with a natural event, a natural extreme weather event. So in terms of humans, going back to the venom sac and the alkaloid venom causing anaphylaxis, we have to make sure that we don't have any incidences of people, you know. I'm actually going off track, sorry, because it's really important to note that if we do find any, those are 3 granular types of baits. We do have another type of eradication, which is a quick kill. It's an immediate kill, and that is a direct nest injection. And we use fipronil, which is a termite solution. We use it for fire ants in a much lower dose. So Other countries around the world, they do have infestations of fire ants, but they don't have an eradication program. For example, in the United States, they've had 82 deaths from fire ant attacks. In Australia, we haven't had any deaths, and that's a statistic that we really want to keep. So when we find fire ants on a public space, such as a school oval, a sports field, any parks of recreation, open areas, we get there within 24 hours, at best 48 hours, to eradicate that nest immediately, just because we need to keep our humans safe. But in terms of humans with the granular bait, these are baits such as pyriproxyfen, indoxacarb, and methropine. These are all very common baits that you find in your household, pest treatments. It's also found in the mosquito controls that local government associations use as well. So it's safe for humans. But in terms of native wildlife, as I said, we have to treat in a very low dispersal rate. So the bait is used in very low concentrations. It's very unlikely that birds and wildlife can't find enough bait to be infected. It's also an insect growth regulator. It's only found, there's been studies done, of course, and those studies have not found that any birds, wildlife, or mammals are affected by that insect growth regulator. Many insects can't physically eat the bait. And it's really interesting to note that fire ants can't eat the bait either, as it is. And I'm just going to go off a little bit just to give you an example of how clever, how fiercely intelligent fire ants are as a collective. That bait is actually foraged and brought back to the fire ant queen. That bait has to be processed by the newest batch of workers that the fire ant queen produces. So the pupae. So fire ants can only digest liquid forms of food. So what happens is that fire ant bait, the granular bait, it's fed to the pupae. The pupae process it into a liquid form, and then the fire ants can feed. So our native ants and insects, broad-scale baiting doesn't have long-term negative impacts on any native species. It has been found that fire ants have negative impacts on native ants, and I'll give you that's a hard sentence to say. I'll give you a really good example. I don't know if I'm going over time, I do apologise, but I'll give you a really good example, and it's really important. We found that we actually found a fire ant nest that was half fire ants and half meat ants. Now, what had happened when the fire ant queen, newly mated, was going off to find somewhere suitable to nest, they found a meat ant nest. Perfect. And what happened was there was a bit of a fight going on between the meat ants and the fire ants. And the fire ants were actually winning the war. The meat ant nest was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We actually baited that nest with pyriproxyfen, the distance, and we went back 8 weeks later and we found that the fire ant nest had shrunk and the meat ant nest had actually grown. 8 weeks after that, 8 weeks from the initial treatment, we baited it again with pyriproxyfen, and we visited it again. I think it was 4 weeks later. The fire ant nest was actually completely gone, and the meat ant nest was actually coming back bigger and stronger. So when we talk about fire ants being infested in a certain area, whether it's a catchment area, a backyard, it's not that that land is gone for good. We can claim it back. It's just a slow, methodical process because, again, we can eradicate destructively, but we're in the business of safe eradication. We don't want to upset our own ecosystems or our own native wildlife or livestock, horses, anything like that. So that's how it works. In terms of bees, bees actually aren't attracted to the baits because they don't recognize it as a pollen. Unfortunately, we have actually had instances where fire ants have taken over beehives and destroyed beehives. And as we all know, bees are so important. In terms of fish and aquatic life, yes, pyriproxyfen and indoxacarb is harmful to aquatic life, and we absolutely do not use them near waterways. What we do is we use distance and the Advian, possibly, up to 20 metres within a waterway. So if it's a reservoir, a dam, a catchment, we will only go so far up until 20 metres. The rest of that 20 metres until we actually hit the water, we use the methropine or S-methropine because that is the only ingredient under the APVMA that we're allowed to use around waterways. In terms of our livestock and pets, absolutely the insect growth regulator is safe to use around mammals, including lactating mammals. It only sterilizes a fire ant queen. It will sterilize a native ant if they ingest it. But again, it's a foreign substance to a native ant because they're sugar-based. And we often say this when we're out and about at engagements. You would have to eat even if you eat your own body weight in the granular bait, you wouldn't have any ill effects. In terms of the fast-acting bait, it is very safe to use around pets and livestock because, again, it is such a low dose and such a light dispersal that even if they do eat it, which they probably, I'm not sure if they would, we haven't found that, none of our scientific research has shown that any livestock and pets enjoy the bait. We have found that chickens enjoy the bait, which is why they get penned for 24 hours. In terms of poultry, obviously, the active ingredient is at such a low dose that even if consumed, even if the chickens consume it, it wouldn't be present in the meat or the eggs. So there's the argument that why should we even eradicate? Why should we treat for fire ants if we're putting these active ingredients on the ground? And the cost to Australia, if we do nothing about it at all, would be devastating. Going back to other countries such as the US, they have a 48 to 50 kilometre spread rate. They have 513 square hectares covered in fire ants at the moment. China has an 80 kilometre spread rate. They've been found in Taiwan, the Caribbean, Germany, and now very recently we found out last year that they're actually in Italy. All these countries don't have eradication programs. What we have is that eradication program, so we're able to contain it. If we didn't contain it, the projected cost to our households in terms of the environment would be $84 million. To our household, $536 million. Agriculture, $381 million. And I'm going to stop myself and go off side again because this is really, really, really important. We had a gentleman in the scenic rim area of southeast Queensland who lost his whole lambing season to fire ants. What had happened is the farm owner had gone on an extended holiday overseas, popped a manager in there to look after him that while he was away. That manager actually penned the lambing ewes into a paddock that had fire ants on it. What happened was that as soon as those lambs were birthed and hit the ground, the fire ants swarmed and attacked, and none of those lambs survived. So the whole lambing season was gone. So that's the impact that it can have on our environment. James Cook University did, in terms of environment, the James Cook University did a study 8 years ago. They did a study on which of the introduced species were the most destructive in Australia. they found that fire ants were more destructive than all the other introduced species combined. They also found that over 70% of turtle hatchlings were eaten by fire ants every year. So that's quite damning. But the actual projected cost to Australia, if we didn't have a fire ant eradication program, if we didn't treat to get rid of fire ants, and this was an actual research project done by the Central Queensland University. They released those study findings in 2021, and it was quite jaw-dropping. So the reason why we all have to work together as a community, whether it's reporting fire ants, whether it's industry treating, whether it's industry not making sure that they abide by the legislation of how to transport, store and produce, we all play our part in making sure that we don't spread fire ants so that we can get on with the business of eradicating them. There is obviously a lot more information than we can put into 30 minutes. So you will have lots of questions, and I'm going to hand back to Greg for any questions that might have arisen.
Well, thank you for that, Jen. That was an awesome presentation. And I'm always nervous when I see these biosecurity stories because it seems like when we have invasive species, they're usually so difficult to control, let alone eradicate. And so it's really nice to see at least one, and we'd rather not have them, obviously, but at least one that we look to be able to eradicate, and really nice to be able to see the research and the effort that's gone into finding really targeted ways to control this pest. So thank you so much for that. I really enjoyed the presentation. Now, we have had a bunch of questions come through. I know Andrea had a hand up very early in the piece. I might ask Andrea to kick off the questions, and perhaps, Andrea, if you'd like to turn on your camera and microphone, you can ask Jen directly your question or make your comment, and then we'll move through the chat and answer some of the other questions.
Thank you, Andrea. I'm so sorry I'm not visible to you.
I know. Maybe if you stopped sharing.
Yeah, perhaps stop sharing the screen.
I have stopped sharing.
Oh, you have? Yeah.
It's just I disappeared.
Anyway, welcome everybody. And thanks for joining us today. And thanks, Jen, for your presentation today. I was speaking with you earlier this week about this, and I was just wondering how it hooks up with some of the citizen science projects we've got going in the area using iNaturalist, and how that might work for you.
Absolutely. Citizen science projects is something that we're very keen to be involved in. At the moment, what we have is a general biosecurity obligation. So if anybody thinks that they've found fire ants, and they're obligated to report fire ants within a 24-hour period. Now, that's not something that we want to bash people over the heads with. It's much more convenient and it's much more enjoyable if people can be involved in finding them. The only thing is, because fire ants are so dangerous, they are potentially fatal, we have to be very careful with how we ask people to go out and about and look for fire ants. So at the moment, we are actually speaking with the Invasive Species Council and other organisations. We do have a project team stood up at the moment. We're hoping that in the very few short months that we will have a citizen science project that is good to go. But at the moment, we do have to work around legislation. We have to work around the health impacts that could ensue from it. So again, with the safe eradication rather than eradication, we have to be very, very careful of putting people in harm's way. The worst case scenario that we can have is to ask people to go out and look for fire ants, be stung, have an anaphylactic reaction, and that's not what we want. So we have to be very, very careful and abide by legislation. So fingers crossed, we are working, our science team, our policy, our engagement team, there's lots of people all huddled together in a cupboard and bashing this out and trying to get some kind of citizen science project going that is safe for everybody.
Could you give us a few details, Jen, of what that citizen science project is actually going to be looking at? Is it like a mapping project or is it a control project?
No, it will actually be a mapping project.
Okay.
It will be aligned with our general biosecurity order where we expect people to be vigilant with their eyes on the ground. It's just that we have to be very careful between having people put their eyes on the ground and actually disturbing that nest and being attacked.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I guess, and this may tie back to, and I'm not sure if you're aware of the previous couple of QWOC forums that we've had where there's been the bug hunt and other programs where there's sort of protocols for collecting information using photographs, geotag photographs and that sort of thing rather than actually collecting animals.
Absolutely. And that is the premise that we're actually working on. Observation rather than physical action in the nest.
Very good.
Absolutely.
Okay, now Jen, we've had a bunch of questions from Colleen, and Colleen, if you don't mind, I'll get you to turn on your microphone and ask those questions in person, or if you're not happy to do that, let me know, and I'm happy to read them from the chat. But you did have a few questions, so it might be easier to get you to ask them of Jen. Are you with us, Colleen?
You got it turned off?
Yeah, no, she's enabled, but she looks to be muted. Let me just see if I can unmute. I've just sent you a request to unmute your microphone there, Colleen.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, so I was just wondering if our property, I'm speaking from the Eco Village at Currumbin, where we have a lot of lots interspersed with native forest and a lot of waterways.
Yes.
Some of the waterways are permanent, some are, they come when it rains. So I'm just wondering which insecticide would be used in a situation like ours.
First of all, hello, Colleen. We're very familiar, with the Eco Village at Currumbin, having started our eradication treatment 4 weeks ago on the Gold Coast. We actually had a question from somebody from your village yesterday too. So thank you so much for being a very active community. In terms of the bait, that would be determined by our fire ant teams on the ground. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. I do apologise. So that would actually be determined by our fire ant teams on the ground. We are actually looking at coming out to visit you next week, so that we can actually show you the baits. You can put your hands on the baits and show you. You can actually be involved in observing the treatment in the area as well. But for me to actually say in that area when I'm not actually familiar with the actual waterways, exactly what ingredient will be used would actually be quite misleading for you.
Yes, sure, thank you.
So, sorry.
Yep, sure, thank you. That's good to know. I imagine you'll be in contact with our caretaker about the visit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just going on with the Eco Village in Currumbin, we are looking to get out and about in that area with lots of engagements, especially our operations team. We have actually just put on 6 new teams out there because it is such it's a significant area. And as I say, we are in the habit of safe eradication. So please involve yourself in that when we come out there, which should be next week.
Okay, great. So I had another question, which was related to how do we best manage movement of organic materials, because there's a lot of probably movement here of organic materials because a lot of people are growing vegetables and
Absolutely.
working on their gardens, and so with a lot of mulch and sometimes soil and
Absolutely. I'm going to answer your question in several parts. First of all, if you're using potted plants, if you're going to move them out of the area, bare root them, wrap them in moist newspaper and repot them, and people to repot them to where they're getting to. In terms of mulch, anything like that, ask the question of your supplier, are they compliant with the biosecurity regulation? It's really important. The other thing that you can do to get as much information as you can is we have online training courses on our website. But we also we have an industry team that works very heavily with industry and business who are moving soil, hay, mulch, anything like that. We also have a really big compliance team that will be in the area. They will be this is terrible to say, they will be in unmarked cars to make sure that everybody is compliant. What we've actually changed the legislation. As I said, we've changed the biosecurity zones today with inclusion of the Gold Coast. And one of the reasons for that is because we've been given higher powers in our compliance legislation. We're able to immediately give people penalty infringement notices for not abiding by that biosecurity regulation. So everybody in those coloured areas, they need to be compliant. Does that answer your question? I feel like I'm
yes, just I suppose just in terms of us actually bringing plants into the village, should they be, because we also do quite a lot of planting here.
Yes.
How should we deal with those plants coming into the village?
How you deal with them coming into the village is to make absolutely sure that they are compliant with the biosecurity regulation. They need to be, ask them, can I see your biosecurity instrument permit? They have to have a permit if they're moving around in zone 2, which you are in now.
So
absolutely make sure. Sorry. So make sure, ask them, are they compliant? Please show me your permit. Okay. If they can't show you their permit, do not accept. And I'll give you a really good instance that this doesn't just apply to Southeast Queensland. We recently had a wholesale delivery of potted plants from the Logan City Council area, Tambourine Mountain out that way, and they went interstate into Victoria. We actually found a fire ant queen in one of those potted plants. So it's really, really important.
Okay, thank you very much.
That said, Colleen, when we're actually coming out and about with you, we will actually we'll actually give you a lot more in-depth for your specific situation.
Great, thank you very much.
And Colleen, just to answer your other question as well, yes, we were a bit slow hitting the record button today. So what I'll do, Jen, if you don't mind, is when we're done here, I might get you just to redo the first few slides of your presentation so I can stitch them together into one video that can go up on the QWOG YouTube channel. So
absolutely.
We'll get that sorted. Now we've got a question from Agabar. I think you're good to go. Agabar, if you'd like to unmute your microphone and ask your question.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Hello.
Thank you so much, Jen, for that great presentation. My question would be, how possible is it for other people or organizations to get involved in this strategic eradication plan, especially if we would wish to come with a different additional alternative measures, like to speed up the work, like use of conservation detection dogs, like how it is being used by the Queensland Biosecurity team, canine team. Yeah, how can, for example, already if you have already established well-trained conservation detector dogs, how can they be involved into it, like in terms of giving support in when you are doing work in some areas or locating fire ants and sourcing the materials to train those dogs? How is that possible? Or the question is not on this platform? Yeah, thank you.
I think I understand. I understood two questions there. One, how do we train the odor detection dogs? And two, if anybody has a new innovative means of treating for fire ants, how do they get involved and have the research done on it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah, kind of, but I was saying, how can people who use conservation detection dogs get involved in as an alternative measure or as an additional effort to, so that, because it is a community work, for it's our obligation, all of us, to like to fight these ants. How can we get involved into this? Thank you.
Right. So you've actually got odor detection dogs yourself?
Yeah, we have. I work with Southern Queensland Landscapes.
Right.
We have a team of well-trained conservation detection dogs that find koala, foxes, and other stuff. But we would like to be part of eradication of fire ants and training our dogs. How is that sourcing materials, and how can this approach, is it good approach for fire ants, or how do you see that?
It's brilliant. First of all, I'll just let you know how our odor detection dogs work and how they're trained.
Yep.
We have 6 of them.
Lovely.
What they are, they're imprinted with the pheromone of a fire ant.
Yep.
So that they can detect up to 30 meters away and down to a meter underground. How they're actually trained is not something that I've actually been privy to. What we could do is actually get you together with our odor detection dog team so that you can have a conversation.
That's really, really lovely. I would really appreciate that, Jen. Thank you.
Yep. Greg, would you be able to provide my details to Agaba? And then I'll let you get in touch with me, Agaba.
Yeah,
I would be grateful. Thank you.
No problem. We'll facilitate that. Thank you, Agaba. All right, Melinda had a question as well. Melinda, are you good to go?
I think I am. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, I'm president of Bat Conservation and Rescue Queensland, and I'm just wondering, we're seeing some odd stuff in the bats at the moment, and also in lorikeets. And we seem to think it's related to the waterways. I'm just wondering, number one, if it rains after you've sprayed and the treatment gets in the waterways, is it still possibly active? And two, can it be taken up by the plants?
No and no.
Okay.
Basically, and I'll tell you how. Basically, with the waterways and the bait itself, what happens is it's actually designed to neutralize in moisture. Okay. So we can actually perform treatment 24 hours prior to rain and 24 hours after rain. As soon as water hits that granular bait, it starts to degrade and neutralize. What's actually left in the ground is nothing toxic, and there's no ingredient left in that ground whatsoever. There might be a little bit of soybean oil residue, but that's about it. The actual corn grit will decompose and the ingredient neutralizes, and that's how it's designed. So if we pop distance or pyriproxyfen up to that 20-metre boundary before a waterway and it rains, it will actually, even if it's washed, it will actually have dispersed before it actually gets to that waterway. That's why we've got that 20-metre buffer. So even in heavy rains, it won't actually reach the waterway. If it could reach the waterway within 20 metres, the permit wouldn't allow us to do it up to 20 metres. We'd have to take it back further.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Someone had asked me and I said, oh, well, I'll find out. So thank you.
It's the most common concern, and rightly so.
Thank you.
Terrific stuff. Now, I think we've been through all of the questions that came up in the chat. So this is just a final call, I guess, for anyone who has any last-minute questions that they would like to ask, please hit us up in the chat and we'll get Jen to answer them. Now, Jen, are you happy for me to share your email details with the participants?
Absolutely.
Webinar?
Anyone and everyone, absolutely. And I will just say, fire ants are actually contained in southeast Queensland. We do know that they can get out through human-assisted movements. For anybody up in far north Queensland, we do have electric ants that are under an eradication program, and it's really important. So if anybody's in far north Queensland, if they would like information about the electric ants, I'm happy to provide it and get you in contact. The yellow crazy ants, that's been looked after by the Wet Tropics Management Authority and Townsville City Council. So if there's anybody in those areas, we're happy to put you in contact with them too.
Terrific stuff. And I've just shared your email address, Jen, in the chat for everybody. So, folks, if you want to be able to contact Jen, please copy and paste that email address, because once we end the webinar, the chat will disappear. So you can always, of course, get in contact with Andrew or myself, and we're happy to pass Jen's details on. But quicker and easier for you guys if you copy and paste it now. So, look, there's been no other questions come through. Oh, hang on. Yes, we have. Colleen's asking, can you provide evidence of it not persisting in soils? I'm assuming you're talking about the chemicals there, Colleen.
Absolutely, Colleen. What I will actually, we do have online what we call a scientific knowledge base on our website. It actually goes through many, many questions about the bait, but we can also provide it for you specifically if you like, that specific scientific research. We have a laboratory and a team of scientists that are working, I wouldn't say 24/7, but they do work a lot. They are absolutely committed to research, and we work very closely with the APVMA, and we have all that information for you. If I give it to you now, Colleen, I might actually misinform you or miss some information for you. I prefer to provide it to you in a complete form. But no, it doesn't persist in the ground. Even the toxicity, the ones that are toxic, such as indoxacarb and the methropine or S-methropine, they're also designed to break down in moisture as well.
Terrific. Thank you for that, Jen, and thank you, everybody, for the great questions. Thank you, of course, to QWalk for putting on these forums. I think there's some amazing information shared, and obviously, just judging by the number of questions and great comments that we've had along the way, this has been a very valuable session. So I'd just like to ask you all to perhaps thank Jen for her presentation today by dropping some applause emojis in the chat box there, as I've just done. Thank you, Jen. As I said, a great presentation. I'll contact you shortly after this to try and pick up the bit of the presentation that we missed in the recording at the start.
Yes, absolutely.
To get those recordings to Andrea, of course, in due course, to get up on the QWalk YouTube channel. So thank you once again. Thank you, everybody, for your comments, your questions, and for coming along today. And we'll see you in the next QWalk forum.
Thank you so much.